A mental illness is a condition that impacts a person's thinking, feeling or mood, and may affect his or her ability to relate to others and function on a daily basis. Each person will have different experiences, even people with the same diagnosis. There are, based on scientific research, two types of causes: biological factors or life experience, and environmental factors. Inside the biological factors, we have
genetics. Mental illnesses sometimes run in families, suggesting that people who have a family member with a mental illness may be somewhat more likely to develop one themselves. Susceptibility is passed on in families through genes. Experts believe many mental illnesses are linked to abnormalities in many genes rather than just one or a few, and that how these genes interact with the environment is unique for every person, even identical twins. That is why a person inherits a susceptibility to a mental illness and doesn't necessarily develop the illness. Mental illness itself occurs from the interaction of multiple genes and other factors, such as stress, abuse, or a traumatic event, which can influence or trigger an illness in a person who has inherited susceptibility to it. In recent years, mental health professionals have become increasingly aware of the importance of genetic factors in the etiology of mental disorders. Since the Human Genome Project began its mapping of the entire sequence of human DNA in 1990, the implications of its findings for psychiatric diagnosis and treatment have accumulated rapidly. A new subspecialty known as biological psychiatry has emerged from the discoveries of the last 2 decades. Biological psychiatry got its start in the late 1980s, with several research groups identified genes associated with manic depression and schizophrenia respectively. These studies ran into difficulties fairly quickly, however, because of the complexity of the relationship between genetic factors and mental illness. For example, schizophrenia. Researchers have known for many years that first-degree biological relatives of patients with schizophrenia have a 10% risk of developing the disorder as compared with 1% in the general population. The identical twin of a person with schizophrenia has a 40 to 50% risk. As of 2002, genes appear to influence the development of a mental disorder in 3 major ways. They may govern the organic causes of such disorders as Alzheimer's disease and schizophrenia. They may be responsible for abnormalities in a person's development before or after birth, and they may influence the person's susceptibility to anxiety, depression, personality disorders, and substance abuse disorders.
Infections. Certain infections have been linked to brain damage and the development of mental illness or the worsening of its symptoms. For example, a condition known as pediatric autoimmune neuropsychiatric disorder, PANDA, associated with the Streptococcus bacteria, has been linked to the development of obsessive-compulsive disorder and other mental illness in children. In considering an infectious etiology to any chronic mental illness, there are at least 4 categories to consider. First are those infections already recognized to induce psychiatric symptoms. These include pneumonia, urinary tract infection, sepsis, malaria, legionary disease, syphilis, typhoid, diphtheria, HIV, rheumatic fever, and herpes. Research done at the Johns Hopkins Children's Center and published in the Archive of General Psychiatry in 2001 found that mothers with evidence of herpes simplex type 2 infection at the time of pregnancy had children almost 6 times more likely to later develop schizophrenia. And in the US, Europe, and Japan, per cluster of individuals who develop schizophrenia later in life closely mirror the seasonal distribution of ixoid 6 at the time of conception. Second are those parasitic infections such as neurocysticercosis, where the brain is directly invaded by the infective agent through a well-established imageable mechanism. While the mechanisms for psychiatric manifestation are easy to demonstrate when brain tissue is directly affected, there are also multiple documented reports in the literature of psychiatric symptoms associated with other parasites like Giardiasis, Ascaris, Strychnine, and Lyme Borrelia, and viruses like Bornavirus. Next are those parasitic bacteria and viral infections like toxoplasmosis and strep, where a strong statistical link to mental illness has been demonstrated, but research is underway to establish a causal connection. In human, acute infection with Toxoplasmosis gondii can cause brain lesions, changes in personality, and symptoms of psychosis, including delusions and auditory hallucination. Remember, the brain is your body's most energy-intensive organ. It represents only 3% of your body weight but utilizes 25% of your body's oxygen, nutrients, and circulating glucose. Therefore, any significant metabolic distribution can impact brain function first. This link is borne out statistically. Mental patients have much higher rates of parasitic infection than the general population.
Brain defects or injury. Defects in or injury to certain areas of the brain have also been linked to some mental illnesses. By Adolf Meyer. He published comprehensive case reports about patients who present behavior disturbance after head injury and proposed a set of disorders called traumatic insanities, which includes consciousness alteration, psychosis, and neurological symptoms. Since then, many efforts have been done to improve knowledge in this area, but it still constitutes a fertile field of the research, with many gaps to be filled. In spite of considerable amount of paper in the literature, the levels of scientific evidence are frequently low. The importance of TIM is justified due to the high incidence of the TBI, the personal suffering and social costs in the consequence of this pathology. The difficulties in evaluating TBI start when defining its severity. The classification usually considers data of the clinical history, cervical exam, or neuroimaging. A widely accepted severity classification uses the Glasgow Coma Scale, GCAS, which is applied during the patient primary evaluation. A 13 to 15 score in the GCAS indicates a mild TBI. From 9 to 12, a moderate one, and from 3 to 8, a severe TBI. Another commonly used classification is based on the lack of consciousness and amnesia. For example, obsessive-compulsive disorder. The diagnosis of obsessive-compulsive disorder (OCD) in TBI survivors requires special attention. Some manifestation of other conditions frequently associated to TBI can complicate the identification of the disorder. For example, some patients may show repetitive behaviors due to memory problems of preservation as a consequence of executive deficit, becoming anxious when they become aware of their difficulties. In contrast, patients with impaired self-awareness may not realize obsession and compulsion as excessive or unreasonable.
Prenatal damage. Many prenatal risk factors are known to have adverse consequences on fetal development, and there is an increasing interest in effects on the mental health of offspring. However, associations with prenatal risk factors may arise because of postnatal risks or thought confounders, including high ones. As a result, caution is required and assuming causation. Schizophrenia isn't the only mental illness linked to prenatal events. Using data from a Dutch beer cohort, Brown found that people whose mothers were undernourished while pregnant had a significantly increased risk of major affective disorders, such as mania and depression, severe enough to require hospitalization. Other researches have shown that adverse events during pregnancy, including infections, toxin exposures, and maternal stress, can boost the fetus' future risks of problems such as depression, anxiety, autism, mood disorders, and attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. Events in early childhood are also linked to persistent mental health problems. Childhood maltreatment, for example, increases the odds of developing depression or post-traumatic stress disorder in adulthood. Substance abuse. The National Bureau of Economic Research, NBER, reports that there is a definite connection between mental illness and the use of addictive substances, and that mental health disorder patients are responsible for the consuming of 38% of alcohol, 44% of cocaine, 40% of cigarettes. NBER also reports that people who have been diagnosed with a mental health disorder at some point of their lives are responsible for the consuming of 69% of alcohol, 84% of cocaine, and 68% of cigarettes. Unfortunately, drugs and alcohol often do little to address the underlying mental health symptoms, and ultimately create a whole new batch of problems for the patient while also increasing the severity of the original mental health symptom or symptoms. When you have both a substance abuse problem and a mental health issue such as depression, bipolar disorder, or anxiety, it is called a co-occurring disorder or dual diagnosis.
Other factors, poor nutrition and exposure to toxins such as lead, may play a role in the development of mental illnesses. And some life experience or environmental factors are certain stressors can trigger an illness in a person who is susceptible to mental illness. These stressors include death or divorce, a dysfunctional family life, feelings of inadequacy, low self-esteem, anxiety, anger, or loneliness, changing jobs or school, social or cultural expectations. For example, a society that associates beauty with illness can be a factor in the development of eating disorders. Substance abuse by the person or the person's parents.